Welcome to Question Mark, a safe place to ask dangerous questions. Does the land of Israel belong to the Jews? And we'll be taking a look at this through three different lenses: a historical lens, a legal lens, and a theological lens. But first of all, let's draw out where we're talking about. This is the land that's roughly known as the land of Israel. Israel was first visited by the father of the Jewish people, Abraham, somewhere around 2000 BC, when he was called by God to travel from Ur of the Chaldees up the Euphrates River and then down into Israel and settled there. And for 3 generations, the nation of Israel's forefathers lived there: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But after they multiplied into the 12 sons of Jacob that became the 12 tribes of Israel, they immigrated into Egypt for a while, actually for 400 years, where they multiplied into a large nation, came back out, and then entered into what's known as the Promised Land through this general direction at just about this point under the leadership of Joshua. And that happened in roughly 1400 BC. This is the moment that's largely thought of as the time the nation of Israel entered into the land. That was the beginning of their continual occupation of the land. Now, when they entered in, there were other people groups there. There were Amorites and Hittites and Hivites and Jebusites and Midianites and Canaanites and other people that existed in the land that either left because of wars, because of persecution, because of fleeing, because of extinction. None of those people groups still exist to this day, but from the time the people of Israel entered in 1400 BC until now, the Jewish people still exist and have existed continuously in the land until that point. Now, there was a period that was known as the Judges that went on for a while, and then eventually in about 1000 BC, this is the golden age of Israel. This is the time when King Saul, David, and Solomon were in charge. This is when the temple was built in Israel, and this is the time that they look to as the time when we were all united and we were one big happy family. Well, after that, the nation was divided into 2 different Jewish nations, known as Israel and Judah, where they continued on until 722 BC and 586 BC, respectively. And during this time, Israel continued to not only exist in the land, but they continued to rule in the land. Now, from 586 BC all the way through until 1948, the people of Israel continued to live in the land, but they were not in charge of their own land. In fact, there were various other groups that were in charge of the land, including the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans and the Seleucids and Muslims and the Crusaders and the Ottomans and the British. All different groups were in charge of the land during this time. And it's notable that the people of Israel continued to live there. Some fled, some went into exile, some were killed, but some always lived in the land while all of these other rulers were in charge. There was one notable exception in the midst of that time, a time which was known as the Hasmonean dynasty, when the Jewish people did have semi-autonomous control, moving to autonomous control of their own land. And that happened from 147 BC to 37 BC. So it wasn't until 1948 AD that Israel became a nation again. So it was somewhere around 2,500 years that Israel was not a nation, but they did occupy the land itself. So historically, you ask, have the Israelites been there for a long time? Have they occupied the land continually? Have they been in charge of the land for hundreds of years? And the answers to all of those questions are yes, which historically gives them a legitimate claim to the land. The next question is, does Israel have a legal right to be in the land? In 1947, the United Nations voted to make Israel a nation and to divide up the land that we now call Israel into two sections, one that's led by the Jews, one that's led by the Arabs. And then in 1948, Israel was able to create a constitution and begin the nation that we now know as the Nation of Israel. This was a creation of the international community in the wake of World War II, and they have been there as a legitimate nation from that point until now, over 75 years. Now, it should be said that the nation of Israel today is not the same as the theocracy that we see in the Old Testament. It's not the same as when God was the king over all and he had his human ruler who was his representative there. No, today Israel is a secular state. It's a democracy. It's a place that has people of all different kinds of backgrounds. Of course, there's an awful lot of Jews that live there, but there's also Christians, and there's Muslims. There's people from different ethnic backgrounds. There's Arabs, and there's Africans, and there's Europeans, and there's Druze. And there's all kinds of people who have come together in a democratic environment where all of them can have similar kinds of freedoms that we have in the United States. Freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom to be able to vote equally and bring their representatives in a representative democracy. Israel is, in fact, the only democracy that we can find in the Middle East and the only place where people of all different religious backgrounds can freely practice and witness and convert and speak about the things that they see and feel and believe. Israel is different than every other nation around them in this regard, but it is not the same as the theocracy that we see from the Old Testament. So we can see that their historical right to be in the land is clear, and their legal right to be in the land is clear. And the third thing I want to talk about is theology. Now, some of you may not be people who believe in the Bible, and that's fine. You may want to just turn off the video right now. But if you're somebody who pays attention to what the Bible says, if you're somebody who believes that God has something to say about who has the rights to be in the land, then continue listening on. Because from the time of Abraham, when he first came from Ur into the land, God promised to give Abraham this land. And it wasn't just for Abraham, it was for his descendants and their descendants and their descendants. In fact, the Bible says that there is an everlasting covenant that God has given Abraham this land forever. Check out this verse. In Genesis chapter 17, verses 7 and 8, it says, "I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and to your descendants after you, and I will be their God." The language is unambiguous. It is an everlasting possession for you and for your descendants after you. Now, later on, it was specified that the covenant went through the children of Abraham through Isaac. Sometimes there's some debate that this belongs to Abraham and all of his descendants, but it becomes clear in the Bible later on in the same chapter 17, verses 19 to 21, that God has chosen Isaac and his descendants to be the ones who will stay in the land and inherit the covenant of the land. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 40, Moses exhorts the Israelites to obey God's laws and decrees so that they and their children may live long in the land that God has given them for all time. It says this, "Keep his decrees and commands which I am giving you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, and you may live long in the land the Lord your God gives you for all time." Theologically, there is a principle that God has given this land to the Israelites for all time. You can see that a compelling argument can be made both historically and legally and theologically that the land itself does in fact belong to the people of Israel. At this point, somebody may ask the question, but what about Palestine? What about their rights and their history in the land? Check out my next video to hear about the Palestinian arguments for the land, and yet one more to talk about the debates in the West Bank. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and click the like and subscribe below to see more things like it, or just go ahead and ring the bell, and that will give you notifications every time another one of our videos comes up. If you'd like to see another video very similar to this, how about looking at this one right here?